Hello, welcome everybody to another episode of Arthur's Roundtable. We're super grateful for the Family Office Insights community that's shared this and paid attention and others. So thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. We're not exactly high tech over here, so we haven't done all the CEO or LLM type stuff yet, but I think we'll get to that. But so far, we've had a lot of views and really appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll continue to share information with you that's family office adjacent, and as like to say, I'm at the crossroads of a lot of interesting people. So we just have others come on that have nothing to do with family offices. So it's been a lot of fun. So Danielle Patterson was a big shout out to her. She kindly introduced Kris to us today for this episode. And so we really appreciate that. Thanks, Danielle. So Kris, if you don't mind just starting at the beginning and sharing with the group how all this began for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Arthur, for having me on the show. And also thank you to Danielle for introducing us. My start in philanthropy really began out of graduate school. I ended up working at Stanford University, and I was evaluating youth and gang violence prevention programs throughout the state of California. And this initiative was funded entirely by one foundation, the California Wellness Foundation. And they created this 10-year initiative to try to end youth violence, and really were some of the early funders and believers in shifting the narrative from seeing youth violence as a juvenile justice problem to a public health problem and something to be prevented. And so it really intrigued me about the power of philanthropy because, as any donor, ultra high net worth family or foundation knows, you can have a lot of money, but that doesn't necessarily mean you do good with it or that you are effective in how you give your money away. And they approached it with, I think, in many good ways. They brought in top talent and experts in the field of youth violence and violence prevention. They funded this, they tackled the problem through a variety of different ways by supporting young people in communities, in schools, helping young people get out of gangs, for example. But they also funded research on gun violence to increase the knowledge and awareness about the problem. They funded policy advocacy and shifting people's opinions and funding leaders and building the capacity of organizations to really tackle these issues. And they funded it for 10 years, which is a long time in philanthropy to
Yeah.
fund anything and, focused. So that was really intriguing. And I thought, wow, if you want to create social change, philanthropy might be a good venue. So I decided to go work at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation as my next job, which of course, as you know, is the family foundation of Dave Packard of HP, which at the time, this is 1999, was, I think, the largest or one of the largest foundations in the country. And I learned there that they really had a strategic approach to grant making and philanthropy. And I learned that I liked that. And I decided I wanted to go out on my own as a consultant. I began getting requests for consulting opportunities. And my first client was Charles and Helen Schwab's Family Foundation. So I did a lot of work with them over the years. And that was the middle of the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay Area. So a lot of people were making a lot of money and wanting to give it away. So that was the beginning of my consulting career in philanthropy.
What can we just go back to the first organization? It's often interesting, aside from the obvious funding of Schwab or Packard, we know where that money came from. Was this a public foundation or effort and funded by taxes, or where did the money come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is what's called a health conversion or a health legacy foundation. So it's a private foundation, but it was funded through the sale of, there's many nonprofit hospitals, healthcare systems, or health insurance companies that sold to for-profit buyers and shifted from a nonprofit organization to a for-profit organization.
Yes.
And in that sale, they were required by law to form a foundation to essentially give back to that community that had previously been served through that nonprofit healthcare system or health insurance company. So there are a lot of health conversion foundations across the country, especially as more and more nonprofit healthcare systems are getting gobbled up by larger for-profit entities.
Yeah, it was at the time when you were doing that, that was really a lot of the consolidation was happening. In fact, United Healthcare, I have
Hmm.
with because they bought my first company that I sold,
Mm.
and it was Franciscan Healthcare System, which was a
Hmm.
non-healthcare
Yep.
system.
Yep.
And it sounds like that requirement to fund these public benefit entities was much like what the community banks are required to do to give back money to
Hmm.
the community, right?
Yeah, very similar, very similar. And it's important. I mean, when those organizations are formed, it's really important that they do have the community's best interest in mind and that they, are thoughtful in how they identify what those community needs and ensure that local community voices are involved in the planning and implementation of those foundations.
Yeah, and I read a large part of your book, and so I have a pretty good idea of what the essence of the book is, and without revealing it, I'll let you tell the folks what it is. But what I'm curious to know is when you were involved in that first nonprofit, that first foundation, were you able to actually have impact and demonstrate that you were? Because that's often the problem, right? You throw money at a problem, you don't really track the outcomes. No one's held accountable necessarily. And that's not malicious statements. There's a trend, right? So were you able to demonstrate the work you were doing had some impact?
Well, yeah, because at the time I didn't actually work for the California Wellness Foundation. We were funded by them through the Center for Research and Disease Prevention at Stanford University.
Got
So
it.
we were the evaluators of this initiative.
Nice.
So what they did, which I thought, of course, was effective, is they funded evaluation to demonstrate what's the impact? Is there an impact in what we're having? And absolutely, there was a lot of positive impact in what they did. But that also speaks to a really important point, which is yes, it is important as a funder, as a donor. Of course, you want to know that you're having an impact, but how do you know? And are you willing to support that nonprofit organization to evaluate the impact of what they're doing? Because that costs money. And a lot of times, the title of my book is Delusional Altruism.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book because, I believe that everyone's trying to do the right thing. Donors want to make a difference. They want to be altruistic, genuinely help others, change the world, but are delusional in how the fact that they're getting in their own way and they're preventing themselves from having the impact that they want to have. And part of that is a scarcity mindset. It's really the first chapter of the book. And it's really part of that scarcity mindset is not fully investing in the nonprofits you're trying to support. And an example of that is not funding them to evaluate their impact. So you want them to demonstrate they have an impact, but you're not willing to give them the money to help them make the case or to learn what's working and not working so that they can improve. And so that's one of the ways I
Seems
see that
super
donors.
counterintuitive, right? So
Well,
what
yeah,
What
go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, what I part of what I gathered in reading parts of your book was that, now wait a minute, if you wanna have outcomes that you can measure, you have to run it like a business. And so you can't expect to have good outcomes and measure those outcomes unless you have the people, human resources, systems, infrastructure in order to make that happen like any good business does.
Absolutely. That's 100% correct because, yeah, especially you believe in a cause, you want to end homelessness or increase access to mental health care, whatever it might be. You have a nonprofit organization you're supporting that's doing a great job. Well, don't you want them to have top talent, the best financial management systems, the ability to fundraise effectively, a fabulous board of directors, a clear strategic plan that they're implementing, all those things? Well, of course you do. All of those things cost money. And I think a lot of times donors and even the entrepreneurial ones who are so smart in how they made their money, sometimes their smarts like get tossed out the window when it comes to their philanthropy because they forget the fact that, yeah, businesses have to invest in their talent, in their retention, in their upgraded computer and technology systems, whatever it might be. Well, so does a nonprofit. They need to be in order to be effective.
Do you
And as
think
donors, you need to fund that.
Right. Do you think that part of that mindset, scarcity mindset and fear, maybe it's fear, maybe it's not, is that there's been a lot of, I don't know, there's a company that rates nonprofits on how much they bring in and how much they deploy. And it's sort of not very effective because it doesn't tell the whole story, right? So do you think part of it is that the entrepreneur that made all the money and set up the foundation is worried about not getting rated highly with some of these third party, like a rating agency, for example?
Yeah, and the one you might be thinking of is Charity Navigator. That's one, which is a great organization and one worth looking at, charitynavigator.org, which when it started, it had kind of that financial focus of, percent of overhead. If your overhead was too high, you were a bad nonprofit, things like that. They've since improved their ratings system, how they rate. But yeah, I don't know that donors are worried about that as much as they believe that, as much as that's been indoctrinated into our brains, over time. I remember back when I was a kid watching commercials on television of, helping children, organizations globally helping children in, parts of Africa or wherever. And the message was always, only 1 cent of your dollar donated goes to administration or overhead, and 99 cents goes to helping the people. Well, that's a compelling message, but it isn't actually realistic. You know what I mean?
I
And
don't know
so
how it could be, right?
right, exactly. Like, how could you run a business with 1% of your revenue goes to, pay your operations and your employees and whatnot? So, I just think that that's like a misguided belief that honestly is sort of it's part of the water that we drink. It's been drilled into our heads, and we just kind of viscerally believe that nonprofit organizations should run on a shoestring. And really all that means is that you've got really stressed out, overworked, underpaid nonprofit
Maybe
employees.
not proper talent. I mean, talent costs money, right?
Exactly, exactly. And, a lot of these organizations, you give a grant for 1 year and then they have to prove their results. And then 6 months later, you might give them another grant. Meanwhile, what are they doing in those 6 months when they don't have the funding? Or they don't have the confidence that they can hire the top talent because they can't say with confidence, we have 3 years of funding guaranteed for this particular initiative.
Yeah,
So,
and the world's a competitive place, right? So I did note that example in your book where not only is it not long enough to prove out your business case, let me just talk about it that way, but you also can't hire anybody because they don't know whether you're going to, as a somebody who is a career, they could just go to Google or Facebook or somewhere and know that at least there's going to be longevity in their tenure of employment, right?
mhm, mhm.
Much as you altruistically want to be involved in a company that does good for the world, if you don't know you can feed your family in, uh, 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 13 months, what good is it, right?
Exactly, exactly. And,
Have you,
no one's talking about sending their board of directors on their board retreat to the Four Seasons in Maui. We're just talking about
right?
giving them money to hire a facilitator to facilitate that retreat so that people can do their best thinking and have outcomes that they can then immediately begin to implement.
So since you had your book come out, which has been what, 3 years like that, right?
5 years.
5 years? Have you been able to convince people to look at this and change their lens and say, wait a minute, you probably need to fix the plumbing a little bit here?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Through, my consulting, I have a lot of consulting engagements, advising engagements with my clients. One of them, actually, I can think of is a couple in Silicon Valley who started a family foundation by asking their advisor, help me start a family foundation. The wealth advisor said, sure, set it up. And then they thought, now what do we do with this foundation? We actually have no idea, which is where I often come into the equation. And, I always start with helping my clients think about, what is it that you want to accomplish? What kind of impact do you want to have in your community, in the world? What kind of philanthropic family do you want to become? What issues and causes do you care about? And really helping them kind of unpack that and identify that. And one of the things the wife said was, well, I support organizations trying to help women, kind of get out of poverty, get out of homelessness, and be successful and self sufficient, which is great. But she said something like, but I don't want to support buying computers. I want to support, I don't want to support like fixing if the roof is caving in the organization. I don't want my money to go to that. I want it to go to like helping the women get the training that they need. And it really didn't take very long, but I just had to help her understand chances are the woman needs the computer in the nonprofit that she's going to update her resume. She needs to be able to use the computer to look for jobs or to get the training that she needs or the training delivery. And if their roof is caving in on the nonprofit, they can't run the training program, right? So it really just was a matter of helping her see that there isn't anything wrong with supporting that nonprofit organization's organizational capacity to deliver the services it's trying to deliver. And it really was just a matter of explaining it to her, and she just had an epiphany. She was like, "Oh, I get it now. Of course I understand that." She could relate it to her family's business. She could relate it to remodeling your house. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing.
So I'm wondering, without again being disparaging, was it the lens that she was looking through that was given to her as a result of other people that had foundations and her view on money that she didn't want to spend into those infrastructure things? Or was she just being not very bright about it? And I don't mean to be put you in a position to call her not bright, but what do you think it was?
No, it's the smartest people have this belief, and I think part of it is a fear of losing control. I think a lot of times when donors donate to an organization, they want to track exactly where that money goes, and it's kind of a fear of like the money being misspent and wanting to and somehow a belief that, if you're like directly helping the person, like giving them shoes because they have no shoes, or housing because they have no housing. Like, that's more directly benefiting. And you can visualize that, you can see it, kind of just taking that step back of trusting the nonprofit delivering the services to say, hey, actually, what we need to do is shift our model of how we're approaching this to one that's more effective. And that's going to take some staff training, that's going to take some shifting of our practices and our systems. We needed an investment for that so we can deliver better services. It just requires a little bit more trust, quite frankly, of that nonprofit, that organization's executive director, their team, to trust them that they have the best interest of these women or whoever it is at heart, and that they know the best way to deliver those services, and they know the improvements that they need to make in their organization in order to be able to do that. So I think part of it is just like a trust issue. I think it's a fear. The second chapter in my book is all about fear. I think it's a big problem in philanthropy. Fear of losing control of the nonprofit, fear of losing sight of who you are and what the person you thought you were, and fear of wasting your money. But the reality is, I've yet to meet any nonprofit leader that has taken the grant and run off to the Bahamas with the money.
Yeah, but there are those, right? Good for you not having to. And look, I don't know what I'm talking about. So it seems to be that a lot of the nonsense that was going on in Minnesota and California, and I know you're in California, with the public stuff that was fraudulent has caused people to be really hesitant to deploy capital because they fear that it's going to be circled back to some political campaign. But that doesn't seem realistic if it's your foundation, right?
Well, certainly. So if it's your money, whether you're writing money, giving money away from your checkbook or out of a foundation or a donor advised fund, or your family office is supporting this work, really, I think it comes down to building trusting relationships with the nonprofits that you're trying to support, making sure you know who those people are, what they're doing. It's perfectly fine to request periodic updates on progress,
One would think. Yeah.
have conversations. I think especially when you're giving large sums of money away, those nonprofits want to build a relationship with you, but it needs to be trusting. Like, honestly, they need to know that they can come to you and say, it took us 6 months longer than we thought to hire the right person. Therefore, we're behind. Can you give us an extension on our grant? Without fear that you're going to pull the plug and say, well, never mind, I'm not going to pay you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Oh,
they're
I
dealing
do.
with reality just like we're all dealing with reality, and things are changing. And you wanna have that relationship with the grantees because you wanna be able to be there when things get hard, and you could say, "How can we help?" "What else can we do to support you?"
So is there anything that you can share with us if there's such a thing as a trend in philanthropy now? Is it donor advised funds? Is it setting up foundations? Is it going through a Silicon Valley public foundation? We happen to know those people. Is there anything trending that you can speak about?
Yeah, I can think of 3 things. One is donor advised funds, exactly what you said. That is the fastest growing philanthropic vehicle, and for anyone listening that doesn't know what that is, it's essentially really kind of an alternative to starting a family foundation or a foundation of any kind. It's often referred to as a charitable checking account, where you can open a fund at your local community foundation, at, Fidelity Charitable or Schwab Charitable or wherever you have your money likely. And essentially, that organization will handle all the back office of distributing the funds to whatever organization you want to support and kind of handling all the tax and legal issues and the reporting. So you're essentially taking a charitable deduction, getting the tax benefits immediately when you allocate whatever amount of money. And you can do it with as little as $5,000 or as much as you want. And then as often as you want, you can disperse that money. Just tell the donor advised fund sponsor, I want to donate to whatever organization. Here's the amount. Here's the information. And it's very easy. And there's other benefits. You aren't required to give away a certain percent of your assets annually as you are with a private foundation where you are required to give 5% of those foundation assets away. For example, it provides for some more anonymity for the donor in terms of what you're funding. And it's easy. It's easier. It's less expensive. I'm not saying it's better or worse than a private foundation. It's a great vehicle and it's really growing in scale. Also, it's helpful when, let's say you have a liquidity event and it's coming up on the end of the year and you want to make a charitable donation, but you don't quite yet know what you want to support. You can put it in a donor advised fund and give yourself a little breathing room to figure out what causes or issues you actually care about.
And get the
So that's a big
benefits of the tax, right? Right away.
Yes. And you get the tax benefit right away. So that's one trend for sure. I would say another trend, and this is what I'm seeing a lot in my work, is succession planning in family philanthropy. And as we have, as you know, a massive intergenerational transfer of wealth underway right now, a lot of the donors are aging out and thinking about how do I transfer my wealth not only to my children and grandchildren and heirs, but how do I ensure that our philanthropy continues on, if that's a family foundation or donor advised funds or whatever it might be. And really thinking about, questions like I was just talking to a gentleman today about this, actually, how he wants to continue his family foundation in perpetuity long after he's gone and he's in his 80s. And, he wants to have, but he doesn't want to lose control. He doesn't want the board 40 years from now to be kind of funding willy-nilly all kinds of strange things that he didn't care about. So how do you balance getting clarity about what your values are, your priorities, the issues that are important to you as the donor, and ensure that that kind of legacy is built into the foundation so that the board, 40 years from now or 50, who's maybe, has they're 5 years old today, right?
Right.
There's nowhere, no one knows them. How do they have the information that they need to ensure that they're making the best decisions that align with the donor intent without that donor like dictating from the grave, right? And without being handcuffed by so much restriction that they can't adapt to changing situations and changing environments because of course the world's going to be a different place in 40 years. And one of the things he cares about in particular is a certain kind of cancer. Well, and that's what he's been funding the research around. Well, that's great, but in 40 years, that cancer might no longer exist. There could be a cure. So how do you have enough openness in that kind of legacy and those expectations while allowing that board to kind of stick with the goals and the original intent of the donor?
One would think that that would be a natural sort of first principles thing to do in setting up the foundation, assuming that you want it to last beyond
Mm-hmm.
your longevity. It is not the case.
No, and you're right, it should be. But, look, people have, just like people have, delay creating a will or an estate plan. People don't want to think about their demise, right? They don't want to think about not being around. And they fear losing control. And in their life, and they think they're going to live forever, like we all do, right? So you often put off those decisions until you're no longer physically capable or emotionally, mentally fully capable of making those decisions, or God forbid something happens unexpectedly and you can't. And, a lot of it, as you know, in family philanthropy and family wealth has to do with ensuring kind of clarity of mission of the family, communication among the family, so everyone understands kind of what's happening and And a lot of people are hesitant to do that with their adult children and grandchildren. And so, oftentimes people feel like philanthropy is going to be the glue that brings the family together. But if you don't have those underlying principles in place of communication and engagement and education, then family, it's the same, right? The family has the same quirks and issues that every family has. And tossing a bunch of philanthropic dollars on top of it isn't necessarily going to bring people together. So it just requires some thoughtful planning and it requires letting go and sometimes painful conversations, but so much easier to do that while everyone's healthy and.
So that is a trend that you're seeing people finally adopting.
Increasingly, yeah. And, a lot of it's out of necessity because we have, an aging population. A lot of these original donors are now in their 80s and 90s and recognizing that we need to do this. But it can be hard. I mean, I have another client right now that is a large, multi generational family foundation where their first generation is passed on, but the second, third, and fourth generations are all very much involved and on the board. It's a very large board, all family members, and they're trying to grapple with they've been around for 50 years. How do we set ourselves up now so that we can be around 50 years from now? And not just around, but thriving when the family has, grown 10 times, tenfold, and our assets might have grown, but we can't control what that is going to be like. And how do we think now about succession, next generation engagement, and senior members of the board allowing the next generation to step in and them to step off without fearing that, well, they don't know what dad thought, right? Or they don't know what granddad thought. I know, or I've been around on this foundation for 30 years. You can't, it's fear of like losing that institutional memory and that family connection. So how do you build that in among the generations that never met the donors and don't have that personal connection to what they wanted to do? It just requires a bit of effort.
Do you think that when introducing this governance is a surprise to people?
Well, sometimes. I mean, sometimes the board is comprised of family or sort of entitled family, people who feel that they deserve to be on the board just because they're family members. And, that's fine at the beginning, I think. But then I think what's more important is you bring on people that have expertise, knowledge, or time to be committed to the organization. So you really have the best board possible, not just who's around. I think oftentimes when these foundations start, there's no term limits. You're on lifetime appointments. Well, guess what? People don't want to let go of those
Right.
because, they care, they want to give back, they feel connected. There's also prestige of being on a foundation board. Sometimes you have money yourself to give away as a result. And it's hard to pull that back if you don't set up term limits at the beginning. So I really encourage term limits so you can bring in new ideas, new perspectives on an ongoing basis. And then, I think governance has to evolve over time in any organization, in a business, in a
That's right.
regular non-family foundation. So I think it's important to just put in regular practices like board self-evaluations every year, a couple of years, maybe every 10 years, do a review of what is the governance structure we have in place. Is this really what's working well, what's not working so well? What changes can we make to improve how we work? And, kind of creating that culture of agility and effectiveness. I'm kind of going back to where we started the conversation around evaluation. You want to evaluate yourself as a foundation, as a philanthropic family, evaluate your governance, your staff, your systems and processes on a regular basis, just to not to be over complex about it, but just to understand what is working well, what isn't working so well, what improvements could we make today that would really pay off in, a lot in the future.
It struck me that I don't know a lot of, yeah, I traffic in family offices. Okay. Let's just call it that. Right. And, uh, I don't ever take a role like you are taking a role with them. It's just not something I have an expertise or interest in. But it struck me that there's not a lot of people like you who can help families do this sort of thing. However, there are a lot of people who are at money center banks and the big places that want to help you set up the foundation so they can manage the money. Some would say that's a conflict. I'm not sure there is, but my question is going to be: are there people embedded in those places that can effectively do your role? Maybe sometimes, what's is that? Are those people? Are there people there that can help like you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. At some of the largest firms like Bank of America, JP Morgan, yes, they have whole philanthropic divisions of people that can provide that kind of support. However, that does require usually their person's actual wealth advisor that they're working with reaching out to their colleagues to get the support, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes they're just simply not aware of it. I'm not speaking specifically about Bank of America or JP Morgan, but others that I've talked to. So the wealth advisor has to avail themselves of the resources that they actually have in house. And if they do, that's great. And there's a lot of support that those organizations can provide. But in my experience, there is some limit to what they're able to do, right? So chances are that those staff, they might help, meet with the family, help facilitate a family meeting, a family conversation about their giving, but aren't likely to conduct strategic planning for the family foundation, aren't likely to do a full succession plan for that family because they just have limited capacity and bandwidth of what they're able to provide and not able to provide. I
And
think
there's some
also,
regulatory issues too, right?
sure, absolutely. Yeah. And oftentimes they're not necessarily equipped to, have those deeper conversations or deeper discussions. Or, I think one thing that holds a lot of wealth advisory firms and family offices back is fear of losing the client.
Oh, yeah.
So if you I have no problem kind of pushing back on my clients and saying why. Like, why do you want to do that? Are you sure that's really a good idea? I think you're making a mistake. Or
Yeah,
have
you're
you
not
taken
risking AUM going out the door, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And there's a lot of value to I'm not trying to be obnoxious. I'm just trying to help them make the best decision and make sure that they really thought through what they're doing. And exactly, I'm not worried about the AUM walking out the door.
yeah. Like I said, I don't think doesn't have to be a conflict
Mm-mm,
because if you're going to provide, even to the extent that we've just discussed at those firms, the benefit of those other resources that the wealth advisor may have, that costs money. Nothing's free. So you have to pay for it somehow, right? And so
mm-mm.
you're going to pay for it through the aggregate of AUM, or you're going to pay for it and somebody like you that does it separately. Still has to pay for it, right?
Exactly, exactly. One thing that I think is problematic, I've seen a lot of firms offer free services to their clients in order to move their assets. Like, if you move your assets over to us, we'll provide free succession planning for your foundation. We'll provide free strategic planning for your foundation, whatever it might be. I have concerns about that because I just think of it as you're trying to reel them in, and your goal is really assets under management. And then you're not going to want to deploy those assets for philanthropic purposes.
Right.
And you're not going to push back on the donor saying, you're being obnoxious with your kid, like, give them a break.
Yeah.
But I will do that.
Right. Of course. Yeah. It's easier to be direct and authentic and say what's really on your mind if you're a yeah, and again, I think there's real value in all those places. I know a lot of those people, and I think
But yeah, absolutely.
if I'm your colleague and I'm giving advice to your client about philanthropy, and I suggest they give away a lot of money, and it's going to take it off your balance sheet, you might be you know taken in the back alley and beat up a little bit, right?
I think it's short sighted. And I think it's actually an example of that scarcity mindset I talked about because you really have to think big picture. So yeah, maybe you're giving some of that assets under management away and it's decreasing, but you are providing a lot of value for that client. So there's
And building
stickiness there.
trust,
You're
right?
building trust. And if you're doing it well and engaging the next generations along the way and building your relationship with their kids or grandkids, then you're not likely to lose those clients when the original client is no longer involved in the picture or has passed away, which is a huge risk and a huge problem, as you know, for a lot of wealth advisors and multifamily offices for sure. So I think it's also thinking long term. And then, honestly, there are donor advised fund sponsoring organizations that allow the family's wealth advisor to continue managing those assets.
Totally, totally.
there's a lot of creative options.
We have friends that actually came from Danielle, a company called DAFShare that
Mm,
has basically a fintech that has made it so it's easy to put your DAF in there without disrupting anybody who's managing the money, without any of that, and just make it easy for you to find places to deploy some of your DAF money.
mhm, mhm.
Kind of the sign of the times
Yeah,
where, technology steps in and makes the process a little easier.
yeah. And behind the scenes, and it can be a white glove offering that you can provide your clients.
Totally. Yeah. So aside from what I highly recommend that people who are interested in the topic, Kris kindly sent me a copy and I was enjoyed it. Thank you. Read the book. But is there other things like, do you have a program where people can come onto the website, for example, or be in touch with you and start the process of realistically putting a plan in place?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think one of the biggest challenges for families is they don't have a strategic family giving plan. They are giving reactively, as one of my clients described it, giving in onesies, twosies, just sort of giving here, giving there. Somebody asks, you feel guilty, you make a grant, or you're at the end of the year, you're scrambling, wishing you had been more thoughtful about the organizations you want to support, but you're trying to get money out the door for tax purposes. And it's just too easy to give reactively and give out of guilt and kind of be overwhelmed by the process. So I am a big believer in creating family giving plans. And I have a free masterclass. It's an on demand masterclass that your listeners, I'd love for you to check out. It's called Three Simple Steps to Creating a High Impact Family Giving Plan. It's an hour long and it provides just real insights, the mistakes to avoid, and three steps you can take to create that family giving plan. So you can find it at familyphilanthropysimplified.com/free training. So that's familyphilanthropysimplified.com/free training. And it's a great resource because I think, if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And it doesn't have to be that complicated just to have clarity on what it is you want to accomplish with your philanthropy, how you want to accomplish it. Do you want to involve your family or not in the process? And what is that kind of 12-month roadmap that's going to help you get from where you are today to where you want to be, and a game plan to be able to implement that?
Thanks for doing that. Thanks for sharing that with everybody. Is there, back to trends for a minute, is there any data or at least anecdotally you've seen, there's people that are making lots of money, exiting companies, being part of a startup that got exited, and all of a sudden they're, worth, 100 million bucks and may not even considered what to do with it besides, buying a new Lamborghini or something. Is there people continue to give to set up foundations, who continue to give to charity in its various forms? Is there any metrics that you've seen or experienced?
Yeah, I haven't seen metrics on that, but I'd say a couple things. One is, oftentimes we think about giving once we've made all the money, right? Once we have all that money to give away. But I think it's actually more effective to be giving in your lifetime, in your 20s and 30s and 40s, when you are making the money and not necessarily having it all or having all the time, but kind of building that philanthropic muscle, that giving muscle, whether it's donating to your local community foundation or any organization or be serving on a board of directors. But because you learn so much as a donor by giving, there's a phrase I use, which is like learning by grant making. Like giving the money away is a great way to learn about how to give money away, right? What are the
Totally.
mistakes you made? What are the things you
Totally.
wish you did differently? What are the blind spots? But also what excites you, like what was so fun and gave you joy about doing that? How do you want to replicate that in your work so that by the time you do exit or have some other liquidity event or inherit money, you're not then deer in the headlights. You have built that muscle and you have that much more knowledge and know-how, experience. You have a sense of what issues you care about, don't care about as much, the ways you want to have an impact. Do you want to be really involved and hands-on? Do you want to be behind the scenes? Do you want to be anonymous? All those kinds of things you will have learned through the process. And so I really encourage people, it doesn't have to be a lot of money. It doesn't have to be time consuming, but to begin to give in your lifetime so that when you have money to be much more strategic, thoughtful, and impactful, it comes a lot easier to you.
Yep, totally makes sense. I think, we've had a lot of people who are second generation that were brought up in an environment or part of their training from their parents was, "Okay, we're rich, so let's deal with that so you know how to deal with that. Second, here's what you it might be a good idea to build a muscle. You're gonna make some money, you're gonna take so much and save it for yourself, and you're gonna take so much and you're gonna do good to the extent that you can or want to, and that muscle is built by an early age." Have you seen people putting programs in place to help the kids and the grandkids consider building that muscle even early on if it's just pennies?
Yeah, I think, the classic sort of 3 jars strategy, when you get as a kid, you get your allowance or you get birthday money or whatever it is, a third of it for savings, a third of it for spending, and a third of it for charity, and thinking about what are those issues? What are the if it's give to the animals, great, let's donate to the local animal shelter, whatever it might be, but building in that awareness and that ownership of that process as well. Even quite frankly, for little kids, like just building in a culture of sharing, a culture of looking out for other people that might be disadvantaged or the new kid at school that doesn't know anyone, like befriending them. Just thinking about helping others and being kind to others and looking out, paying attention to who might not be having as good of an experience as you are or is left out of the group. So I think that too is a way that you can engage 3-year-olds, in kind of a culture and family culture of giving and generosity.
Have you gotten any rumblings from your community and the people you talk to that all the stuff, the pullback for USAID has had an impact in any of the people that you are in a position to give away more money to fill those gaps? And just for the record, I don't mind putting it on the record that I believe there's tons and tons and tons of fraud in that. And so it's probably a good idea. A lot of it's shut down, but that's just my opinion. But it's also had impact to those charities that are doing good.
Well, a couple thoughts. One is, the government is giving away or, funding way more than philanthropy ever could. So philanthropy could never fill the void of what just in the US government does in terms of education funding, human services,
Right.
USAID. Even if all of the, every billionaire gave all of their money away, I think it still wouldn't, amount to as much as the government is able to do. So that's just a perspective I think to have. Like philanthropy is not going to solve the problem. But philanthropy can be really helpful is taking risks, being that kind of risk-taking funder to try new ideas and not worry that it's gonna flop because, okay, well, we learned something, now we can try something different. Or, testing the model, and then the model proves successful, and then you can scale the
Scaling it.
model.
Yeah, scale it.
And then
Yeah.
the government could scale the model, right? At even a greater scale. So I think there's a lot of value in philanthropy and in working in partnership with government, be it federal, state, local. There's a lot of value there. I also think, yes, and to answer your original question, I absolutely have a lot of clients and know of a lot of nonprofits that were dramatically hurt through the completely unexpected elimination of USAID dollars to the organizations they were partnering with. It caused a lot of damage to the great work that was being done. As I understand it, I haven't seen the data, but I've heard this and I think it's worth reviewing that a lot of people have died because they didn't have access to the resources, medications, services that were being provided by organizations around the world. And so, I think in philanthropy, phrase that is often used is first, do no harm. And it means, just because you have money and you're giving it away doesn't mean you can't actually harm people in the process of doing that because you do it ineffectively or without thought or because you pull the plug organizations one day, which is essentially what the federal government did. And so that is not an effective way to identify problems or fix them or be thoughtful stewards of public or private dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. It was massive. Whatever the outcome was, there, no matter what you do in that big of a scale, it's going to hurt people. Maybe unintentionally, but maybe not. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate your perspective on that as well. So I would encourage everybody to grab the book. You can get it anywhere, right? Amazon, etc.?
Yeah, Amazon. I'll just pull up Delusional Altruism. Of course, it's backwards, but Delusional Altruism. It's available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, I think booksamillion.com, probably other places. Absolutely.
Yeah. And no, go ahead.
I'll just also say, I think one of the misguided beliefs that a lot of donors have is that, giving away money is easy. And I'm not saying it's rocket science, but I am suggesting that it's harder than you think and requires investment in yourself. And so, just if it's buying a book and reading a book, if it's retaining an advisor, if it's watching my free masterclass, if it's listening to a webinar, watching a webinar or a podcast, it really is important to invest in yourself, invest in your own learning. If you need to bring on support, just like you might bring on a family office or you might retain a estate planning attorney, it's important to invest in the success of your philanthropy so that you can have the greatest impact on whatever issue or cause you want to support.
Yeah, run it like a business. And I love your suggestion that even before you have the big exit, to start building the muscle and learn. It's kind of like the same thing. You learn by doing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like investing, right? You start small with what you have, right? So that when the stakes are big, you're much more savvy in how you're investing.
Kris, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thanks again to Danielle. Big shout out for putting us together. Maybe in a few months, if it's okay with you, we can do this again and sort of catch up on trends and talk more about what's going on.
That would be great. I'd love it.
Yeah. Thanks, Kris. Thanks
Yeah,
very much.
absolutely. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in.
Bye bye.